Welcome. Hello, Rebecca. So I'm now going to share my screen. I'm going to walk you through some slides, and please stop me and ask questions at any point if it doesn't make sense. This is effectively Reaching People 2.0, following a lot more research. We're going to have a reboot. And one of the biggest questions, as when I share my screen, you will see, is should I give up trying to wake others up? Now, as we briefly spoke earlier, awake is not a good word to use. However, that's the word that really will make people want to watch this video. So to begin with, you really want to use a word that is not really derogatory to the people that we're trying to speak with. So I like to use the word aware. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? And then what you've got is you need to specify which subject the person is aware of. And then really, if you want to share information with them, your goal is to get them aware of that information. Does that make sense, Rebecca?
Yeah, so instead of should I give up trying to wake others up, which might get people to be interested in this presentation, we could instead be thinking, should I give up trying to raise awareness of X,
Yes,
Y, Z?
exactly. And you can choose whatever
And
that
it may
subject
be that
is.
I give up X, but I carry on with Z.
Exactly. Now, the key thing is, as well, is that it becomes very addictive to research 100 different subjects. And what you'll see is people going down all different rabbit holes. And firstly, you're entitled to do whatever you want with your life and your time. So if that's what you want to do, then go for it. But if you have a goal of making others aware of what's going on, corruption, problems with certain medical procedures, etc., then it's wise to focus on that and not be dragged down to other topics that really aren't that important until we sort of get the corruption sorted. That makes
I
sense?
think, yeah, just a thought on that is that, jack of all trades, master or mistress of none. Like the temptation is for it to be to see the big picture where we have to get everything and we have to get the word out on everything.
Yes.
I think at this stage of the game that we can be more effective if we actually choose
To be specific.
part of choosing what to focus on is it involves some trust that there are going to be other people focusing on other things. So we can have a
Well,
general gist of the big picture, but we can be perhaps more effective if we
well,
can
that's the
focus
benefit of
into
groups,
something
isn't
and
it?
know that other people are doing the same
Yeah.
thing.
Well, that's the benefit of groups. In an ideal world, I think it was Malcolm X that said, we're not outnumbered, we're out organized.
Mm.
So the thing is, if you had a large body of people get together, divvy it up, you concentrate on this, you concentrate on that, et cetera, you could get a lot done. There's probably 100 people focusing on the same thing when they could get together and really, and it's not easy to work together, especially in the last few years. But this project was specifically focused on how can we support all the other groups in what they're doing.
That reminds me of when I was at drama school, and we'd have a play to work on, say Tolstoy, War and Peace, for instance. Massive topics, but we would divvy up the research bits. So, a
Yeah.
couple of people would look at the science, technology, and other people would look at the history, or
Oh,
the
and that
social
would be
science,
brilliant.
the
And
costume.
I would
In
love
a
to do
way,
that. Yeah.
perhaps an analogy for how we could work smarter rather
Yeah,
than
I'd love to do that more on this project. Right, let's have a look at this next slide because this is quite startling. So this is from a book, How Minds Change, and it was a survey that was done in in December 19 initially, and they surveyed people and they listed the people that said they would refuse to get the vaccine, and it was a large number. But by April 21, they had flipped 86% of that number. Okay, that is a huge number. That right there is how they have managed to change the attitude and opinions of a large number of people, and 86% of those people. Okay, you see how startling that is, Rebecca, how that was specifically targeted. So they were working out how successful they could be with messaging.
So I understand that. is that 80, flipping 86% of people between April 21 and March 22?
But no, from it was actually the original survey was December 19,
Okay.
2019,
Mm.
to April 21. So it's 15 months,
Wow.
something like that. 15, 16, 17 months, something like that. But then what they found was they reassessed them in April 21, and they'd managed to change 86% of the people that said they would refuse to actually take the vaccine. Now that's a startling number. And then this is a big body of work that I've researched. It's called The Adaptive Unconscious. This is one of the best books on it. And there's 8 to 10 other books I'd recommend. I'm going to put together a article on this, so you don't need to write this down, following an interview I did at the weekend. Now, the quote that Timothy Wilson says there, and Timothy Wilson seems like a really good guy. He seems to have a lot of high ethics, and he's looked into this in detail, and he's released the book to the world. And his conclusion was you can change people's attitudes without them knowing they have been changed. And this is really, really key. I'm under the awareness and conclusion now that I can have my attitudes changed if I'm not careful. I've got to be very careful about the information I'm exposed to, the things that I watch. If you go back 1,000 years, Rebecca, pre-TV, pre-much entertainment, most of the things that you'd be exposed to, you could surmise that they were pretty much, for the most part, true, weren't they?
And they would be, you know, from the people and environment around you.
Yeah, so you'd have a direct experience. So what would happen is that the adaptive brain, so that part of your brain that makes conclusions automatically, would be basing those conclusions on very good information. Yeah. So if you saw someone eat some berries off a tree and then collapse, you would instantly know to be careful of those berries. Yeah. But if you were watching that on TV, your brain would still make the same conclusion, or possibly make the same conclusion, but you wouldn't necessarily know it. These things happen so quickly. But yeah, we're going to go into that much more in the next few.
Makes me think of where we're at now with AI, you know, like what's been doctored and artificially generated to look.
Yeah, well, I want you to hold that in mind, because I'm going to discuss it in a few slides' time, but it's very key, because a lot of the conclusions that we can come to, we need to reassess. I've had to reassess a lot of my own conclusions about myself, because, you know, most of the world thinks they're not good enough and all these things. And that's really from our experiences, we come to that conclusion, but it's not true. I mean, that, for a start, that sentence doesn't make any sense. But so this is Jane, and she's concluded people cannot be reached. Should I give up? Yeah. And in fact, most people are stating now, I'm going to give up. There's no point, because people can't, you know, etc. Now, that's a fairly understandable conclusion to come to. If you spoke to 20 people and you've been told to get lost every time, and you've tried to send people links and articles and everything else, then that's a fair conclusion for you to come to, wouldn't it be, Rebecca?
Yes, and being devil's advocate, if I were to accept the premise that I'm responsible for what I create, yes, I would wonder, maybe what am I doing, or how could I do things differently?
Yeah, well, that's the key question. So let's unravel this. People cannot be reached, but I first want to really acknowledge, if you don't know, you know, it's a perfectly understandable conclusion to come to. But it's really,
I'm sure many of us have got to that at some point.
Yeah. And that's literally what got me to start the project, because I considered myself to be very good at having debates and conversations, and all of a sudden nothing worked. And that just piqued my curiosity so much, and having so much experience in perception and language and everything else, I was like, well, I need to understand this. It was just something I couldn't let go. So really, let's look at a belief formation. So if Jane goes up to publicly speaks, has a terrible situation, you know, just absolutely, it goes horrible. She has a second one, everyone's yawning. She has a third one where she slips over. It's quite feasible that she's going to develop a belief, I'm not good at public speaking. Okay, this is generally how we form beliefs. We'll have multiple experiences of the same kind, and then we develop a belief. It's very important how we form beliefs because they have been the way that we survived in the past, because we was able to create generalizations. So if you went to a door that you'd never been to, Rebecca, would you know it's a door?
No.
Yeah, of course you would. Think about that. If you've never seen, if you walk up to a new house, okay, you're going to know what the door is, aren't you?
If I've never seen a door before.
No, if you go to a house for the first time, okay, and
Oh, I
then
see. I've seen a
yeah,
door,
yeah,
but not the house. Yes.
yeah. So you know it's a door, but how did you know that was a door? You'd never seen that particular door. So you've generalized, and that's how we get by in the world. We create generalizations, which are this looks like that, so it's going to be roughly the same.
But winding back to babyhood, though, the baby
Yes.
learns
First
about
time
what a
you
door
wouldn't.
is. The door opens and somebody walks through it. And I'm going to get fed when mummy walks through
Yes,
the door and
exactly.
comes and gets me. Yeah.
So you're building all those things unconsciously. The baby's not sitting there talking to itself. That's the key point. Yeah. The baby's not going, oh, that's a door. I walk through it. The baby's just noticing and then building those connections in the back of its mind. The thing is, the problem is that once the belief is created, you only ever see things that match that belief. Okay. And you'll see this, that when you see someone do good, you say, oh, you did really good, but they dismiss it. So what happens is that there's a part of the brain, it's really the filter part of the brain. And once it really operates in the world by looking at what's in the world, and it filters by our belief system. So you generally will only see the things that match it, and you will discard the things that do not match it. Now, if we think about what's happened over the last couple of years, that when it comes to Jane, she's had all of these experiences where, you know, people have generally told her where to go, been very annoyed, all these things. She's possibly going to develop a belief people don't listen, or they won't, you know, they've gone crazy, they've gone mad, they're stupid. These are common phrases that people will say. And again, I think they're fair conclusions based on the person's experience, but then we have to test, is that true? Yeah.
And we may already have, in our own programming prior to trying to have these conversations, we may be thinking, I'm not heard.
Well, this is actually really, you know,
guilty.
I don't want to, yeah, well, I don't want to go too much into this today, but what you just said there is actually one of the most important parts of it, is that we've been conditioned for an awful long time. The fact that we can accept British Gas making 10x the fees and, you know, and not go up and shut that place down is just testament to how we've learned to live with things. And that's actually a function of the adaptive unconscious. We adapt to situations so quickly that if they move the goalposts slowly enough, you know, people will just walk into accepting most things. And there comes a point where you go, hang on a minute, you know, what's going on? So if you really think, I mean, you've been frustrated, haven't you, Rebecca? But you've had some small wins. Yeah. And you've seen people move, but we often discount those, you know, because we're so emotionally focused on the people we really want to reach. A lot of the time is our friends and family. Yeah. So really just
to go back to what you said in a slide or two before, like at the start, how this project was born was because you considered yourself to be good at debating, but things weren't going according to normal conversations.
yes, yeah, there was a
Whereas
change.
I came on board the project because I would run a mile from an opportunity to debate anybody on anything, and yeah, I've grown considerably since then. But as a result of the project, yes, I've had some small wins.
Yeah. So what you'll see there is that your belief system is really important, because the belief system is by which we interpret information and we make sense of the world. Okay. So let's get on to now how minds have been changed, because when you begin to understand this, then you can really, I think you're going to have a lot less judgment for yourself and a lot better idea of what it is you need to do to understand how you need to get success. Now, how minds have been changed, and obviously there's a few questions I'll address, that the spiritual aspect to it, is it our job, our role, all of these things. Yes, they're important questions. And then these two books are really quite phenomenal. The one on the right kind of blew me away. I actually thought the guy had ripped off the project, but the book had been written before the project, so I don't really have much of a case there, but he'd obviously come across the same sort of research. So on the right, David McCraney, who seems like a good guy, He does have, in my opinion, wrong assumptions on things like ivermectin and a bunch of other things. But you'll begin to realize that the conclusions you come to are really based on the experiences and input that you've had. And if you've not been exposed to any data contrary to the official narrative, then there's a very good chance that you're going to believe it. You know, you should be spotting some problems with it by now, but it is quite easy to fool ourselves. Now, in that book on the right, David goes to a number of places in the US where they've spent millions of dollars basically having thousands and thousands of conversations with people, measuring them, recording them, and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Now, if you could imagine that happening, you'd have a fairly good idea on how to have a good conversation with someone. It's quite a mind-blowing book. I think these two books are very important to read. The one on the right's much easier to read. The one on the left's got quite a bit of science in it. The one on the left, by Tali Sharrow, she, I do believe, is a neuroscientist. They put people in fMRI machines, spoke to them all different ways, and measured which way changed the brain. Okay, so they had a massive head start on understanding how to phrase information, how to frame information. Now, the conclusion from both of these books is facts do not change minds. Okay, now while facts and information is important, just giving them to people does not have it much effect. Under certain conditions, it can. So there's one part of the book on the right where he talks about if you present someone with one or two facts, generally you will get them to believe what they currently believe even more. So they're going to reject you and stick their heels in. When they get hit with about 30% of disconfirming information, their belief just collapses. So if everyone around them or 3 or 4 people around them start talking to them, then it does start to undermine that.
So I want to just recap on that. So can you
Yes.
say that again? But so if you
So
give
if you're
somebody a couple of facts and they are of a
going to dig
different
their heels in,
viewpoint, they'll dig their heels in.
yeah.
But
If they're then exposed
30%,
to a lot of information that contrary to what they believe, then their belief will collapse. And what's happened all through history is that if you believe something and then suddenly the new information come out and it just hit all the media, your belief would collapse very quickly. This is why the media is one of the big gatekeepers. And there's a thing known as filter bubbles. And what it is that there's algorithms on a lot of the social media that will only expose you to information that matches your current belief. So you won't get exposed to contrary information, and therefore any false belief can survive. And that's why cults really will isolate themselves. Yeah. So they won't expose any of the cult members to disconfirming information, and they will create, you know, inoculation, etc. So just to
can I
wrap
ask a
up,
question?
yes.
So based on what you just said, could that explain, so what you, just to really hit home, if you're exposed to say upwards of 30% of different information from what you had thought before,
Yeah.
that can change your beliefs about something. So could that explain how, with the onslaught that the general public were subjected to about the
Yes. At
jabs, that you
86%.
could have, I mean, you know, for instance, I know people who didn't vaccinate their children at all, any of the childhood immunizations, who decided, yep, this is the one.
Yes.
And they all went off and got it.
Yes.
Whether that was just to go on a school trip or whatever, but based on nothing more than that, you know, something
Yeah.
quite superficial.
Well, what
Is that what's
happens
going
is,
on?
yeah, well, this is where we get into the technical aspects that I'm going to talk about in the one next week. I think it's next week or the week after. Effectively, what happens is that a lot of people's reasons for why they're doing something may or may not be the case. And the reason is because the biggest drive of why you do something is often hidden from you, not, as Freud said, because of repression, but because of efficiency in the brain. Yeah. So if you're sitting there, Rebecca, and you suddenly think, oh, I'm hungry. Did you think that? Or did your brain already do that and then give you the conclusion?
Better.
Yeah. You're not thinking I'm hungry. You're becoming aware that you're hungry. Do you think I'm going to get angry now?
I hope not.
No, it's something that happens as a result. So what's going on effectively is there's a lot of processing that goes on outside your awareness, and then you get to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Now, the people that they flipped, the 86%, they had managed to manipulate their unconscious, and predominantly their adaptive unconscious, to feel that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
The gut feel historically has been very important. It's now something we've got to be very aware of, that our gut feel can also be manipulated.
Mm.
Because it's my opinion now from the research that gut feel is direct access to the adaptive unconscious. But anyway, let's not get into that because it's a bit technical. But this next quote is really key, and it's from the influential mind, and it's, whether at work or at home, our instinct is that if we have something important to convey, the other person will want to know. Okay, this instinct is wrong. Okay, example, and they've managed to really understand this at a really deep level now. I think Virgin did it with the in-flight safety announcement. Pretty much no one watches them. Okay, Virgin completely changed them and hashed them, and not only did they get a lot more people to watch them, but they hit 6 million views on YouTube. Now, that's crazy. Think about that. Yeah, people would actually go to the YouTube channel. So what it is, and I think this is the reason you had the TikTok dancing nurses and everything else, is that you generally, we want to do things that make us feel good rather than good decisions. So by making something that we need to know very interesting to watch, that's when people will watch it. And it's not whether it's important or not, doesn't seem to be that much up the list. This is why we need to be conscious of this and decide how we spend our time. So think about how much time people spend watching the TV, watching Netflix and Amazon, all these things. Why? Okay, because it's entertaining to the brain. They get dopamine hits. I mean, how many here, and I've been one of those people that's been up till 5 a.m. going down every rabbit hole possible. Okay, that's not a good decision. Okay, but it's something that you can do a lot of because you're getting so much dopamine. Yeah, so the brain feels good. 1,000 years ago, you couldn't do that. So the way the brain was structured was fairly sensible for previous times.
So we can say up till 5 o'clock going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, or Telegram link or YouTube video after another, either because it's entertaining or because somebody's got a
It feels
catchy
good.
heading that's grabbing
It
our
it
attention,
it
and
feels
probably
good.
a host of other things like the
Yeah,
notification things, and we're
yeah.
wired to want to tick it all off.
It feels good,
But
basically.
entertainment makes us want to watch something.
Yes, and what you got, so you've got basically grabbing your attention. The way to grab your attention is to make it that there's something you don't know, and it'd be great to know it.
Mm.
So Cialdini talks about opening a book in the library, and the opening page asks a question, and he didn't care about the answer previously, but he ended up having to read the book to find the answer to the question. That's most clickbait, basically. So they understand how to grab someone's attention, then how to lay the information so it's entertaining.
So I just want to recap what you just said, because I think it's really, really fundamental. So it's how to get somebody to want to access that information. It's something that presents as something you don't know that makes you want to know it. Is that right?
One of the ways. So
One of
there's
the
a whole bunch of them. So like clickbait, if you just look at the clickbait, board panda and all those things, you'll get an idea. And obviously they could really backfire. So you want to be sensible about how you layer information. And of course, if you've used proper ethics and good ideas, then you should be okay.
It's also thinking about the Stephen Hawking's document that we looked at, the hypnotic thing of opening up a question that
Yes.
the unconscious mind is then wanting to answer. You're not necessarily answering it, you're putting a whole load of information out there, and you close the loop.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
in the meantime, there's the
Yeah, but
opportunity.
I think again we're looking to those in subsequent presentations, because if we break them down one by one and explain them simply, then you get them. The key is to practice them as well, because there's a lot of research now that unless you practice something, knowing about it isn't enough. Yeah.
What you've got this slide for is basically to hammer home that we can wrongly assume that we've got something really important that the other person ought to know about, ought to want to know about, but
Yes.
we're assuming that they want to know about it and they don't necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like life-saving, and they might even know it was life-saving. So, but the thing is, we've got to test, and if our assumptions are not correct, then we have to understand that the assumption is off. So one of the assumptions additional to this is that if I give someone a fact, that they're going to incorporate it and then just change their mind. We also know that isn't true. Here's a study that really blew my mind. They had a group of patients that had a heart problem. They were just about to go in for surgery. They were given the option to know all the mortality stats of the hospitals in the state. Okay. And then they could choose which one to go to, obviously. The difference in mortality from one hospital to next could be up to 300%. Okay. They offered the patients this data for $50. What percentage of people paid the $50?
Oh,
Hmm?
less than 2%.
It should be 100%. It was 8%.
Wow, okay. Low.
Okay. And that's just this quote. You need that info could give you 3 times. This is the thing. A lot of the time, we don't want to know bad news. Okay. And if you're the bringer of bad news, then a lot of the time people are going to switch off. You have to understand how to layer the information that, I mean, the juice media that we watched a few of the other day, I mean, they're artists from what I can see. I mean, I'm going to say that not everything that they say would be what I would agree with, but watching it, I couldn't believe how much information they pumped into my mind in 3 minutes. Okay, and I'll post a link in one of the emails, or maybe at the end of this presentation when we post it up to YouTube. They are really artists presenting information in a funny way that people then absorb. Okay, and then they've got now 1 million subscribers and they're being shared all over the place. That's the difference between having a piece of information, and a lot of their information is what I would agree with. So when you watch the one on the banking system, it's hilarious, but that information's going into the mind. So really the base point here is that this assumption is very, very key, and it's one that I think all of us have got wrong. Okay, so we have to understand, if we've got a piece of information that's very important for someone to know, that's not enough for them to want to know it. Okay, so moving on, I think this was a really good quote. Believe only half of what you see and nothing that you hear. And obviously, that has to be updated for current times. So on certain channels, I'd say believe nothing of what you see. But as a general rule, the reason that what you hear is because a lot of the time the stories that people tell us are trying to justify what's going on. So if you turn the volume down on the story and just watch their actions. So does anyone trust either of the main political parties anymore? Okay. I would say that that's probably not the case, whatever country you're in, but they still telling us what we want to hear, aren't they? Okay. But do their behaviors reflect? Yeah. If you look through, I mean, there was actually a study done on political analysts and how accurate they were. And it was so bad that they didn't publish it because they're just wildly off, and nearly every promise that's made is broken. But that's not the point. It's just to keep us going, as it were. This slide here is kind of key. So the bubble ahead, above Joe's head here, is the conclusion that he's coming to. The whiteboard is where his attention is. So if Joe sees this, what would you guess? And then it's sort of inferred that this is a virus, et cetera, et cetera. What would Joe's conclusion be with that, Rebecca?
There's something deadly.
Yeah. So it must be dangerous. Now, that's not something that he's necessarily going to say. That's something that he's going to assume in the deep parts of his unconscious. That's why that's known as split-second learning. And I interviewed Matt Hudson last week, and I'll release that interview. And it's very powerful. Split-second learning is very powerful. When you touch a hot stove, do you ever touch a hot stove again in your life?
Well, not intentionally.
No, not intentionally. Once that split-second learning, once it's in there once, generally that's enough. I mean, there are mistakes that I know that I constantly remake, but it's generally not that one. So then when you see this, what would your conclusion be there? Let's say you knew nothing about it.
That the jabs must be perfectly safe to take multiple times.
Exactly. So you know, I've seen a few posts by people that have looked into this, and they
Mm,
think there's no way that it can be true, but it's a very, very powerful narrative.
mm,
Okay. And I recall when it came to the glyphosate that I think one of the top men there was saying, "Oh, it's safe enough that you could drink a pint of it." And then a
mm,
researcher literally went with a pint and said,
mm.
"Okay, can you drink this?" And he went,
And it
"Don't,"
wouldn't.
you know, got really angry. Like, when you say something like that, the unconscious belief is very powerful. It's very persuasive. I was doing a lot of research on advertising, and I can't stand McDonald's food, but when I had to watch their adverts to break them down, I found myself wanting one of their burgers, and I thought, what the hell? It's so pervasive, it's so persuasive. And all I had to remind myself was of the Burger Museum, that, you know, 10 years they don't go off, and then you know, the craving dissipated. But adverts are very, very powerful. Now, the conclusion that happens with these things are not often conscious, and that's why they're very powerful. But that whiteboard of the mind is very key to bear in mind. So if we take Joe, now Joe's down on his soapbox, and we're going to say the soapbox is the unconscious mind. And there's many different parts of the unconscious mind. But if Joe sees that, you can think about his conclusion. Then Joe sees that. Then Joe sees that. Then Joe sees that. You know, who's an authority figure, or in some people's eyes. You then got every single part of society tapped into. Okay, then the censorship is massively important. When we spoke about that 30%, you're not going to see any disconfirming information. The belief is going to be stronger and stronger. And that's why you've seen people with absolutely unwavering certainty,
Mm.
because they're seeing no information contradictory to the official narrative. The free donut is actually a very powerful thing, but not for the reasons that people think. You're not you're not going to get a jab because of the donut. But the reason the donut works very powerfully, because in the mind, you can't say to yourself, I did this for a donut. So then you have to believe in the jab even more. It's
Because
another
it's such a
element of
small thing that couldn't possibly logically slide
exactly
into something
this.
so big. Yeah.
See, when you understand cognitive dissonance at a deeper level, this really begins to make sense. So Leon Festinger, when he did the original studies, found that when he paid people a lot of money to lie, they were happy to then later say, oh, well, I lied because of the money, because that was a perfectly sensible thing to do. But when he paid them a little amount, they then had to change their mind that what they did was actually interesting, when they were paid to lie and say it was interesting when it wasn't. But those that paid a little money, they actually changed their mind and said it was interesting.
Mm.
And they didn't do it consciously. So these things are very, very powerful. But obviously, then you had all the celebrities, you know, queuing up to get it, all the influencers, and then this bombardment of it's safe and effective. I mean, to do anything, even if they did no study on it.
So you've got social proof in there with people that you might respect. You've got authority. You've got
You've got the
guilt
checklist
and
of every
shame,
single
whatever.
persuasive technique.
Yeah, but so just to recap on that, then what's happening is that the the powers that be knew that they needed to fill the space, and there was nothing conflicting coming in order to get people to feel certain and secure about it. And our challenge has been, when we've come across information that, you know, where we've seen harm, or we've seen the alerts that raise serious questions about it, that the majority who only seen this can't. How
Yes.
how you know, our challenge has been how to introduce
Yeah.
that, especially if people don't like bad news
Yeah.
and
But the whole point of this is that
don't see us as an
you,
authority.
you've seen Ocean's 11. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So Ocean's 11 is, and there's 1,000 movies like Ocean's 11. You get a mark. The mark in this case was the public. The mark has their reality completely micromanaged through all the actors, all the changing clothes and situations, and they might put false cars, whatever it is, to make reality seem different from how it is. Okay. Now, once you spot that, then obviously the whole thing collapses. But you'd only spot it in that context. But the filter bubbles were really key because people were not getting exposed to this. But what I can't go into today because they're quite complex, we'll do it in the adaptive unconscious, is there's also unconscious drives within the human mind that really affect our conclusions significantly. One of the main ones is to be socially accepted. So so let's ask ourselves the question, how uncomfortable was it being excluded for our views? Massively uncomfortable, yeah? There's an awful lot of people that would have changed their views to fit in, but they wouldn't have necessarily done that consciously. Susan, do you want to either ask a question or pop it in the chat? One of the two, whatever's good for you.
I was just wondering about this. People don't like bad news, because I bought that when you said it, and then I thought newspapers
is all bad news.
It's all bad news, and because it sells, you have to get positive news to get any.
There's a distinction here that I need to research a bit more, but it's under certain conditions.
Yeah.
What you have is that the brain generally wants information because it's survival, and then when the information comes from trusted sources, then they will consume huge amounts of that.
I think the distinction is that when people were making these choices and the media we were bombarded 24/7 with this was a solution offered. This is the Teflon coated pathway to getting out of a very uncomfortable situation we all wanted to get out of. And so by presenting information at that time that conflicted with the authorities, one, we weren't an authority, and two, now we're putting a roadblock in the way of the way out. Whereas now, if we're trying to show that there's perhaps harm which isn't on the news, or we might read stories but the media aren't actually asking the right questions or doing any of the research to actually give a conclusion as to why people are dropping dead aged 30, then the bad news ties in, because you're tapping in. Are you tapping into cognitive dissonance, David, with that? Because
you're generally
they've taken it, so now we're saying, oh, you might drop dead.
Yeah, well, the thing is, you generally move towards stuff that makes you feel good. And there's something about watching the news where you feel informed. Yeah, if you're getting your friend telling you something you don't want to know, that doesn't make you feel good. There is, in that book, The Influential Mind, there is a chapter talking about, and I'm glad you asked that question, Susan, because it's a very valid question. And I need to read it a few more times before I really understand it. But the basics is that we move towards what makes us feel good rather than good decisions. So there's something about watching the news that people feel informed that makes them feel good. And it's probably not a good decision, to be honest, is it? Because you'd be better off spending your time looking at the medical journals, although they're for the most, but it's getting a balanced view is how you'd be better spending your time, isn't it?
We tend to move we tend to move towards things that make us feel good and away from things that make us feel bad.
Yes,
but why newspapers sell better with based on bad news than good news? You don't get
because of this. Yeah, because of the safety aspect, because you've effectively got conflicting drives going on. So one of the real base drives is safety.
Yeah,
and it's huge. But if it conflicts with other drives, then sometimes you get this weird algorithm coming out. So the thing with that study of the patients, where they're going to go in for a heart operation and they can get that information, that's very key information. But they didn't take that up. So I think that question, park it for now, Susan, and I will really explore that one in one of subsequent things. But there's some generalizations, but then there's examples that break the generalizations. That makes sense. And Rory Sutherland talks about this in his book Alchemy, that you can get a good idea, and then sometimes the opposite of that good idea is actually another good idea. It's not a bad idea. And this is why the human mind's a little bit complex, but let's not get too involved with that just now. But the point of this slide is to just try and understand what Joe has been exposed to. Okay. So Joe, we've effectively got to say that science has been corrupted. The media has been corrupted, that many doctors aren't looking into the info themselves. So you see the actual conclusion of what we're stating, if we challenge these narratives, is pretty major. And because we've had our experiences, it's quite, it's second nature to us now. But just think for a moment, if you had no exposure to that, like how destabilizing to one's mind that would be, and how many years or months or whatever you spent researching that, and then you try and tell people in 10 minutes all of what you've learned. Right? I mean, it's funny when you sort of sum it up like that, isn't it? Because I think, right, so I've just built this like hotel of knowledge, and I've spent years and years and years, and I'm in my penthouse of it, and I'm just shouting down to someone on the street thinking, oh, they're just gonna blindly believe me. It doesn't work that way. And that's when, and it's only when you break it down and unravel it that you get. I taught from NLP was they have certain beliefs that they say to adopt because they're very useful. And one of them is the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. So Rebecca, if I said something to you and then you got angry, yeah, then what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, so I've said something that's triggered that anger in Rebecca. I could easily say, oh, you're an idiot and blah, 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 and all that. But that doesn't really allow me to understand the situation. So if I understand that I can say something, so if I said to you, you are wrong, okay, how does that feel viscerally?
I can feel a tightening, or there's
Not very nice in any way, is it?
And yeah.
So if I call you a sheep or an idiot or any of those things, do you want to continue the conversation with me?
No.
Okay, that's what we have to understand. Now, here's another thing. So imagine for a moment, Rebecca, that you think the BBC is the most trusted news source in the world, okay? And I present to you an independent researcher that says they're lying. What are you going to think?
That you're listening to conspiracy theory.
Okay. Now, yeah, and if you, and by the same token, knowing what you know about me, what would happen if you gave me a BBC article?
If you're the one, if I'm the one who believes in the BBC,
yeah, and you give me a BBC article, what do you think?
You dismiss it.
Okay, so this is such a key point.
So I'm going to dismiss what you present to me because it's not my trusted source, and you're going to dismiss what I present to you because it's not your trusted source. Right.
Now, what's going on here is context is key. Context gives the meaning to the information. They know this, so they did a bunch of studies. They took a headline, they put it in 4 different magazines that had very different sort of trustworthiness, and the believability of the fact changed significantly. Like it went from unbelievable to believable. Now, if they manage the context really well, then it's going to become very difficult to present any information. So we can say, don't use any blacklisted people, okay? And a lot of the people blacklisted, it's really unfair that they've been blacklisted. You need to understand that's very subjective. I think there's people that have done an incredible job, but I won't use them because I know that the other person's going to dismiss it before they read it, because the people blacklisting have done a very good job. So if we look into Joe's mind, okay, now the blue is basically what he's not aware of. So Joe's motivated reasoning is to believe what he believes and dismiss everything that we say. Okay, the green is where he's just making conclusions, and the red is what he knows about. So with the green and the red, the green is hidden in his mind. Now he thinks anti-vax equals bad, but he hasn't really given it much thought. Yeah. So anytime anything even looks like it's an anti-vaxxer, what's he going to do with the information?
Dismiss it.
Completely dismiss it without giving it any weight whatsoever. Okay, so you've got to really know that you're going to have a small window a lot of the time, and just delivering one piece of information is much better than having 10 rejected. Okay, now if we look in Jane's, now really this is just here. The first thing was to unravel it. Second thing is just to have a little bit of look at what's going on. We're going to take a look at something else after this, and then going forward, we'll start to show you what really does work. she'll say, I've tried everything. And I would really ask us that we ask a bold question. Have we tried everything?
Mm.
Do we understand what cognitive dissonance is? Have we learned how to tell stories? Have we done all these things? So we've got to be really honest with ourselves, because it's so easy, and I find myself doing it all the time, to want to blame someone else, yeah, rather than me take responsibility. So have I really just nailed this down, really understood it? She distrusts government. She has apathy, which is totally understandable. She knows science can be bought like anything else. So what you've got is just peeking into his mind. You can start, and if you just think about this, you can start to think about what would and what wouldn't work. That makes sense, Rebecca? So you can look at those and think, right, so, and the next slide's really going to be, it was very eye-opening for me. And I think we'll move on to that and come back to this, which is, I mean, look at that. He says, if that were true, it'd be on the news.
Mm-hmm.
What's the presupposition there?
That the news only reports true things, and that false things that aren't on the news can't be true.
Exactly. So, and this was, yeah, now there's a very good meme out there, and I tried to find it to put into this deck, and it has, media in the 70s, and it's got the media with a tannoy questioning the government. Yeah. And that's back in the 70s and the 60s. And yes, the media was still partly controlled, and there was lots of, stuff going on. But essentially, their customers, their stakeholders were the public, because their income come from newspapers and magazines, etc. But it came to the point where they made no money from that. Their stakeholders and clients now are the owners and the advertisers.
Yeah.
You don't bite the hand that feeds you. So we have to understand that they're not, the stakeholders to the media now is not us. It's no longer us.
There's actually been a societal shift then. This trust in the news and the mainstream news and the BBC, whatever, that had a historical, and the newspapers, whichever your political lenience, that may have had a historical context where journalists were doing their job. Yeah. They were paid by the readership, and that's shifted significantly over the last few years, hasn't it? And
massively. Now, it's no
we're not paying for
coincidence.
newspapers largely. We're getting it online. We're getting it for free, and so they're reliant on people who can manipulate the truth.
Yeah. So basically, they've become an advertorial piece. Now,
that's possibly an avenue of conversation, isn't it? But there has been that shift. Once upon a time, perhaps you could trust it, and the funding structures changed.
Oh, totally. And it's anyone that understands conflict of interest will really understand that, but not until you think it through. Now, let's look at some other possible conclusions. So you've concluded that people can't be reached because I've tried everything and I couldn't reach them. You've got your son in the background, Becca.
Yes, sorry.
That's right. Okay, so the first one is, you may have reached some people in some way without knowing it. Okay. This is a very key point. Yeah. I know a bunch of people that I've reached. I know a bunch of people that have messaged me, and I've had people apologize and all these things. But you can't measure how many people you reach purely because you can't measure the adaptive unconscious. And once we do a presentation on that, it becomes much more relevant. But there's this kind of fairy tale we have in our mind that you walk up to someone, you give them some information, they have this popcorn moment, they go, oh my God, and then they completely change their mind. Life doesn't work that way. It's death by 1,000 cuts. A belief is formed by lots and lots of information. There's certain rules or guidelines that we would suggest, which would significantly improve your chances of having some information, make it into someone's awareness. Does that make sense? Okay, so second one, it is possible that it's difficult to reach others and you haven't known the factors involved. Okay, that's another. So, I mean, I know nothing about it.
Is it possible?
So I'm talking about other possibilities. So the belief that people developed, people can't be reached. And I'm saying, well, that's a truth, but I'm saying these are possible other truths. Now, I know nothing about cars. I'm a real, the term's noob, which is, you know, I know nothing about cars, but I know nothing about cars. Okay. When it comes to communicate with people, I mean, I did 25 years of study on psychology, NLP, and I thought I had a good understanding of communication. Okay. That is completely different. 4 years later now, I realized that I knew communication under certain context, which was talking to someone that had similar views, yeah, or similar outlooks, or was basically on the same side. When you're talking to someone that has different views, it is a completely different ballgame. So if you don't know the factors involved, how can you be any good at it? That makes sense. So what I'm saying is,
for clarity, can you give an example of what you might be referring to as the
right.
factors?
So one would be cognitive dissonance. So there's certain conditions where you want to elicit cognitive dissonance. So if I was talking to you, Rebecca, and I said, you believe that 2 + 2 = 5, yeah? And I said, well, actually 2 + 2 = 4, right? That's going to create dissonance. There's one idea in your mind and there's one idea outside of your mind. Now, which one are you going to more likely reject?
The one outside of my mind.
Okay, but if I can elicit 2 ideas in your head and they don't match, what happens then?
That is cognitive dissonance.
But you have to reject, but what do you have to reject? One of your own ideas.
Right.
See the difference?
Mine as opposed to one of yours.
So you have to change your mind. You don't get a choice.
And this is an example of one of the factors that when we try and perceive to be failing to reach somebody, that we may not be aware this is going on.
Yeah, it's a very subtle thing, but when you understand it, so I don't give people information that I know differs from what they know, unless I tell them a story where that information is laid in there. Because it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. It has zero effect, unless, of course, there's certain conditions where it will work, but it's not particularly a good idea to do. That makes sense?
It's a little like how we know why it's so important to find the common ground.
Yes. Yeah, common ground, because that will change lots of things. So that's another thing, that if you don't know that factor, yeah. So really, the point here is that there's things that you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's really important to know those. And then when you do know that you don't know certain things, at least you know that you need to do something. So I have a choice. I can either learn about mechanics and cars and then start to fix some of their own problems, or I can pay someone else to do it. Okay. And that's the choice that I'm taking when it comes to cars.
Knowledge, yeah.
Okay. But when it comes to lots of things in my own life, like health and fitness, then I want to bring that information into my own mind.
Oh, so that makes me think of an interview I've been watching today between an ex-banker and an ex-doctor. And both of them established that they were in their careers thinking that they knew everything. And then there was all sorts of things outside of the awareness of the doctor, like nutrition and I don't know, you know, lots of things he didn't know while he was a doctor. And then when he did, you know, that opened his eyes to a whole load of things, and then he could no longer actually continue being a doctor in the system, having learnt all these things. In the same way, the banker was a very successful banker until he got fired for raising questions. And it was only after that that he started to realize the Federal Reserve is not federal and it's not a reserve. And so his whole paradigm evolved.
This is such an important point, because everyone's stuck.
It's on both sides, isn't it? We don't know the factors at play when what we're detonating in somebody, when we don't know the structure of the conversation.
So when it comes to this,
they've only got their information, and we may not know certain things we know.
So when it comes to this project 4 years ago, there's so many things under this that I now know that I didn't know before. Now, as I learn and learn and learn more, it refines my conversation. So I've just returned from a trip I went up to Scotland and back, and I interviewed a lot of people, not a lot of people, but we had a few nights out. And Saturday afternoon, I'm in a bar in Edinburgh watching the rugby. And we got talking to 4 people. And by the end of that conversation, they were, oh my God, this is incredible. This is an absolute scandal. I need, you know, I just just told them stories, and and it matched their experience, and I'd pay. And then I met up with Gary Sidley. We were in a bar down the local pub, just having a drink. And then it was funny, there was two girls that were sitting next to us, and they were they had just left uni a few years before, and one of them has studied social sciences. She leans back, he says, "Sorry to interrupt, but I've been earwigging in your conversation. It's really interesting." And we got into a conversation, shared a lot of information. Obviously there was a lot of you know, science and stuff, and she really went, "Oh my God, can't believe it." But then, oh, it makes sense now. So, you know, just short conversations, and people started to really shift their opinion. But I wasn't shoving any facts down their throat, and it's pure practice. You know, I made so many errors. I failed more times than anyone else will. And it's just to understand these, that unless you, and we've done a top tips video, there's 3 of them we did a couple of years ago. And if you look through those, you really want to say, do I do this? Yeah. Ask yourself the question, do I do this? And if you do that, like the ones that you shouldn't do, then that's good news. That makes sense? Because if you literally had tried everything and you had incorporated all the information and then you couldn't reach anyone, that's bad news. That makes sense. And that's like, whatever. But I think the majority is that and I've literally had to look at how I've presented information. I've realized that I haven't done it in the most effective way. So this is why we're having a reboot now, Reach People Too, that we're going to start to go through this and make it better.
I'm going to put a caveat in there.
Yep.
Because you have at least put it in a way, right? So, you know, Muggins here can sit on my bottom trying to be perfection, and not actually get out there. What you did, you just like you got going straight away, and all credit to you. I just wanted to say that it reminds me of when I first you know, was involved in the project and learning some of these things, and specifically the do's and don'ts. It's also a downloadable thing from the website. So do's and don'ts for conversations. And so initially, you know, it seemed quite overwhelming, but I would just kind of think, okay, I'm going to play a game with this. And so I would start to have a conversation and just try one thing. That was how I started to make a difference.
Yeah. And here's another thing. We've got a checklist. Do you go through the checklist every time you have a conversation? No. So, you know, it's really to just test with ourselves, and it's just to be honest with ourselves, because it's so easy to feel down about this. And a lot of that is because of our conditioning, you know, and I've had to really face up to a lot of my conditioning, and I go, oh my God. But the great news is there's a lot of techniques out there you can shift it, and we're going to really show these. So even if that person wasn't reachable, does that mean that no one is reachable? So some people are a lot harder than others. So there's some people on Twitter that I think will be the last people that get it. But that doesn't mean everyone's not reachable. Even if that person wasn't reachable, does that mean that you cannot reach anyone ever, even after studying the subject? So if you couldn't reach someone previously, does that mean that you can't reach someone in the future, Rebecca?
Absolutely not. Not necessarily.
No. So you just acquire the skills. See, here's the thing. When you develop the belief people cannot be reached, you're going to then handicap yourself. You want to say, I haven't been able to do it yet, or I don't know how.
That yet is so important. I mean, you know, I shared previously that we've had a time factor. So people now are not in the same position. They've not been exposed. They've been exposed to more than, you know, maybe we tried and failed, especially with our loved ones. It's so hard, isn't it?
Yeah. You've got family dynamics.
We want to reach most, and probably the hardest to reach.
So
but
when
as time moves on, we're in a different place to try.
Yeah. So if you tell your child to do something, what do they often want to do?
We can ask. Well, I ask you to do something.
The opposite, right?
No.
Okay. So you've got a lot of family dynamics in there as well. So that's understandable. And you can get over those. We've got some videos on how to do that. Is it possible that people can be reached, but that telling people facts is the least effective way? Okay, that's really important to understand. Yeah. If you give someone just a couple of raw facts,
trying to get the best the best scientific research ready for the best argument, and we've come a long way.
It's not about that. Number 6, if there were a set of important steps and you didn't know them, how could you judge yourself? Yeah. And the last one, if there were other factors at play that you were not aware of, would this account for a lot of people's reactions? You know, so it's really the whole point of that part of the project was just to offer some other points, because when I see people post these on social media, I'm just going to give up, people can't be reached. I then think, well, a huge amount of people have been reached, right? They flipped 86% of those people in that study, yeah? But most of those people seem to have flipped back when you look at the take up. Yeah, so people's mind are changing all the time. Now, how we come to conclusions. This is such a key slide, Rebecca. I had to reassess my thinking about thinking. So if I have a thought, or if Joe has a thought, something is safe or something, adverse reaction is good, as that was reframed. If you get sick, it means it's working. Okay. What's going on there is that's the output. You're not going to be able to challenge that because that's an output. But what we don't think about is all of the input, which is mostly unconscious, which happens beforehand. Okay. Now, when those change, because what happens is you get a stimulus, so someone might say something or whatever. What you have in the unconscious mind, it's like a hallway of mirrors. It bounces off all of those and then it comes up, boom. Now, that trust, if that trust in the media was shattered, what would happen? As a guess, Rebecca.
Well, you're shattering that you dismantled one thing that helps to dismantle the other things.
Yeah, take one or two.
You end up with a different output, a different conclusion.
Yeah. Now, all of that stuff on the left, that's all the processing that happens. So you come to a conclusion. Now, if you talk to anyone during the last few years that completely changed their views, nearly every instance, they had a big experience.
It's so interesting to actually ask this of people, isn't it? When did you
what did it for
start
you?
to realize something was going on? And it'll be different for different people, but once you've started questioning one thing that has dismantled the foundation of trust, for instance, then, well, what else can't I trust? Who else can't I trust? What else?
So remember
not what I thought it was.
Yeah, someone made a comment. Once you see what you can't unsee, that's the key. I mean, the amount of people that said, you know, my uncle was in a car crash, they put COVID on the death cert. That experience is so strong, you can't unsee. I spoke to lawyers in the US that read a secret file and then suddenly couldn't unsee it. So what you've got going on is you've got all of those things on the left. Now, until any of those change, the conclusion on the right is not going to change. So you can see it's not wise to challenge an output, is it? It's wise to understand how the person sees it from their perspective. And really, I can see how you see that. But what if, it turned out that blah, 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 or you tell them a story. And what's going on is that the stories are changing these, okay? Because how do you think these were created, Rebecca? So all of these in there, they've been conditioned from years and years of stories, haven't they?
Yes, whether experienced or told, yeah.
Exactly. Now, it only takes one black swan to know that all swans are not white. That's why the consensus is really important. And that's why the censorship is really, really a key aspect of it. That makes sense, because people aren't able to incorporate the information. Now, here's what happens. When you see, if you were just a normal member of the public watching the TV and you see people drop dead in the street, your adaptive unconscious, which is its main goal is to survive and to keep you safe, is going to develop a big pillar that says this is dangerous. Okay. Now you've got another part of your mind, which is information you can access. If you knew it was 98% survival rate, would that make any difference to that primal part of you?
No.
No. And that's why saying that to people made no difference, because it only stored in the bit that you can access.
Oh, so just to press pause, what you're saying is that even Oh, are we talking? So we're saying you have a 99.93% survival rate. We've seen people drop. We've seen the scary images on the telly, and this is deadly, and so it applies to me. I must be scared of it.
Well, you see what's going on. The implicit learning is far more important than the conscious learning.
Yeah.
Okay. So at school, you're not. Are you really told that often? You know, you must obey authority. And some are, but you learn, don't you? You learn by getting whatever. So that's implicit learning. And that's the most powerful learning because it's invisible. And then you get these invisible barriers. So you've effectively can have two pieces of contradictory information. One part will sit in the part of the brain, and I won't get too much into this because you're going to do a whole presentation on this, but effectively this whole thing explains now why people can know something but not act on it, because the deeper information is in the adaptive unconscious, which is put in there implicitly. And the information in there is so important to your survival that you're gonna have this challenge. So there's a question: is it best to try to get people to question their trust in media government? Now I would say probably do those one at a time, but I would say that that's a good question. I think we'll address that in the adaptive unconscious, but the media is an important piece. I'd go for the media first, because I think people don't trust government, but they don't trust government in the part of their brain that's knowledgeable. In that primal part, it was like Stalin would say, wasn't he? Was it Stalin where he said you pluck the chicken, and do all horrible things to it, but you throw it a piece of bread and it will still be your servant. And that's what's going on with a lot of people, that it's so primal that they don't want to question or challenge, upset the apple cart or rock the boat.
Just to recap, because you've explained a lot with this slide. So the output is the conclusions or beliefs that people have come to as a result of the various inputs through stories and experiences and so on. And where we can make a mistake is to go challenging the output, the conclusion, the belief, and try and counteract it, and that's just going to bash up.
It's going to be pointless because the output is not thinking.
Right. That's as a result of the adaptive.
Yeah, it's a result of all those things. So if you walk into a lift, okay, and you see someone standing there who looks very nervous and another person that stands there all very confident, you're going to make a split-second judgment about those people. Okay. You're not going to sit there or stand there consciously working through that. It's going to be instant. According to all your priors, all your previous experiences. So what the media has done is crafted this narrative very expertly to create all these pillars of beliefs. They also know that motives such as fitting in with a crowd, following authority, all of these things, a lot of those won't be conscious. Okay. People just do them unconsciously. Yeah.
We can be more successful at challenging that conclusion by going in, by working out what the inputs have been, and
start to gently challenge those in the ways that work.
So not doubt.
So you don't say the media can't be trusted.
That's a conclusion.
Okay, because if they have a belief that media can be trusted, but if you show them 3 stories, if they read the book Slanted by Cheryl Atkinson, they would never trust the media again. Okay, there's a 10-minute AstroTurf video, and then what's going on is that people are getting exposed to this all the time, and it's just almost this random thing that goes on where the straw breaks the camel's back, and then the person changes their mind. But did they change their mind? Okay, do you make decisions? You see, it's now the conclusion that a lot of the time your consciousness is to guide the ship. Okay, you're not making a lot of these decisions consciously. You're exposing yourself to good information, and then the decision makes itself. I want to address, there's a lot of things in the chat, but one thing I did did notice was someone desperate to get jabbed as quickly as possible. See, what they did was, and people on the ventilators, so effectively what they did was, the basics of all organisms on this planet is to see something as good or bad, move towards the good and away from the bad. So everything will come under that in some way. So they created this narrative, the virus is hugely deadly, right? That's the thing. Now, how do they do that? As Peter points out, they show pictures of people on ventilators. They show people dropping dead in the street, all these things. So then that part of the deep unconscious goes, this is really dangerous. Even though they know that they've got 100 times more likely to die of something else, it makes no difference because the adaptive unconscious works on feeling. It doesn't have a language center. So then what they do is they then show you the way out. They then tell you it's the only way out. So then you have this almost wanton desire to get that thing. Make sense? So they've effectively, they move from the bad towards the good. Now, for a lot of people, when those things were the opposite, so the virus wasn't, say someone's not scared of the virus, but they are concerned about the jab, where are they going to move?
Away from the jab.
Exactly. It's all about perception. It's not about reality. So
one of the reasons why they had to smear, I mean, obviously there was a legality thing too, but why they had to smear the treatments, ivermectin was horse-based, yes, because that offered another solution, and they only wanted you to have
one. It did much more than that. You know what it did?
What?
Gave you a choice, and when you have a choice, exactly, what do you have to do?
And then you
have to think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the whole thing was, it's the only way out. It's the only way out. This gets us. The amount of people that said that to me was truly incredible, not realizing that that was predictive programming.
And so now time's marched on, and the horse pace thing is behind us. Now there's so much, like the War on Ivermectin book is so powerful because you get to see the whole smear campaign about ivermectin, the suppression, yes, of it.
So then what happens?
And in the context of the nurses who had whistleblowers' testimony, the ventilators were actually killing people.
Yes. So what happens to your trust in media? So that all comes down with it. See, this is the thing. So once people start pulling at that string, you've only got to get a little bit of wanton curiosity in there, and they will destroy their own belief system. Okay. So the meaning of communication is really key. One other thing I'll touch on is these magnifying glasses. This is a part of the brain called the RAS system. It's very key in that when you have a belief, you'll see every information through that belief. Okay, that's why these priors are so important. So if you can unravel the anti-vaxxer in having a conversation with someone, they will then look at information differently. So so the key point of this is that there's much more to it than meets the eye, but don't be too confused, because you really just two things. There's input and output. Okay, you're not going to challenge the output directly, because someone says if that were true, it'd be on the news. And if you said, if it turned out that there was a lot of information that mean that you would want to reassess that, would you? Do you see the power of that question? I'm not challenging it directly. I'm just asking them, because the thing is, if you ask people to define, and what's really important, the number one thing is to not trigger defensiveness. Okay, that really is. And if you read that book, How Minds Change, and we're going to make a lot more videos on this, but that is the number one thing, because when you're defensive, you effectively get into there's two main modes of the brain. Defensiveness is the lawyer mode. The lawyer mode is just trying to prove you're right. Okay. The scientist mode, which incidentally a lot of scientists are not in, is to find the truth. Okay. And if you can get people into the scientist mode, so it's really important to give them a way to save face. So what could you say to a scientist to allow them to save face when it comes to the Pfizer data? So if it turned out Pfizer lied to you, would you reassess your conclusions?
Very possibly.
Okay, it's, you know, because you're giving them a way to save face. Obviously, there's a very, I look at this from a very practical standpoint. We've got to get people to see the truth. Yeah. And I'm going to look at the practical way of doing that. And then, you know, yes, there's going to be a bunch of people that probably need to go to prison. There's going to be a bunch of people that are going to feel remorse and all these different things. But the first thing is to get people aware. Okay. So reassess conclusion. So if I was talking to you now, Rebecca, and you thought that people couldn't be reached now, would you be a bit more curious? Actually, maybe they can. So this is Dr. Boz, right? She's got 600,000 subscribers on YouTube. She vaccinated herself. She vaccinated her children. She vaccinated her patients. Okay. She read that paper that was published recently. And she made a video calling it the biggest crime in medical history. She's completely flipped her view, and therefore her 600,000 subscribers are going to see a very different viewpoint. Okay. Here is a message I got off the person I found to be the hardest person to reach. There was 2 friends I couldn't get to during the pandemic, and this is one of them. The other one actually watched the whistleblower video and is completely flipped as well. This guy put himself into the trials. Okay. He's a member of Mensa, very intelligent person, but you can see from that now, he's completely flipped. Okay. Nearly half the respondents of a survey, independent survey, showed that 50% of the people attribute a lot up in there, a loss of a loved one was actually the vaccine. So you're seeing this massive shift now. Okay. And then if we think about it through history, all of these things were commonly believed to be brilliant, weren't they? Okay. But no one thinks they are now. Okay. So it does take time. The point of today was really to unravel this, to really show you that it's about getting your power back. And you've got to understand how things work in order to get your power back. It's not easy reaching people, but it's been one of the most rewarding things of my life. It's made me a lot more humble. My relationships improved significantly, realizing that it's not always the other person's fault. Okay, so we really can. I mean, those 2 books, if you read those and a few more presentation we do, I think you'll be in a much better position. So just on some of the solutions, it's really, you know, not about challenging outputs, it's challenging inputs. The 3 biggest things that we have are stories, metaphors, and questions. Okay. Now, this is the the clever comedy is really cool. This is Juice Media. I watched a few of their videos, and they, if you literally look for the Juice Media, they do a 3-4 minute comedy video, and it's absolutely hilarious. But it's very engaging. You watch the whole thing, and then you just get a lot of information. So if we can get some really good people making some really good films, short, you know, docos, etc. So yeah, coaching is now available. If you're interested, you can email me here. We updated the website. Thank you, Brian. I don't know if he's on today, but I've assisted a lot of groups in just with knowledge, and one of them phoned me up, said, look, your website needs some attention. I said, yeah, I really do. And he said, I can do it for you. And he did it free of charge, just as a thank you for the work we helped them with. So the website should be a lot better. The interviews has been updated. There's an extra dozen on there. We're going to soon be putting a lot more videos on there, a lot more resources. So yeah, it should get better. And if any of you kindly would like to look at it and give us any feedback where you think things might be easier or things that weren't so easy for you, that'd be useful.